Far Cry 6's story was surprisingly good. I had numerous doubts about this game going into it, and despite some of them being true, this game, but more importantly for the sake of today's video, its story was really good. So today I'm going to be spending a bit of time talking strictly about the game's story. There's probably news outlets and other individuals who have already covered a more official review about everything the game has to offer, so if you want to watch those videos you can, as today we'll just be focusing on its narrative. However, before we get started, 3 quick formalities are in order. The most obvious one being a spoiler warning, as we'll be talking about the entirety of the main story, and if you don't want it spoiled, I highly recommend you come back after you beat the game. Second, a huge thank you to the people over at Ubisoft for providing me with a code to Far Cry 6 early so I could get this out in a somewhat timely fashion. And thirdly, I'll be using she/her pronouns to describe Danny as I played the female version. After hearing dialogue from both male and female, I just thought female Danny fit a lot better and was a whole lot better to play in the game, so I'll just be addressing her as she rather than he, but just keep in mind I'll still be talking about Danny. With that out of the way, let's get started. Firstly, we need to cover the very basics of the game to set the scene. Thankfully, this was all shown during the introduction. Yara, which is basically a fictional version of Cuba, was under the rule of a dictator who was Anton's father. Around 13, Anton saw his father executed in front of his own eyes, and eventually 47 years later, Yara was now under Anton's control. Another Castillo and another dictator. But thanks to a miraculous discovery, Yara has the potential to now prosper as a country thanks to something called Viviro, a drug that can cure cancer, except it's built on the back of slaves. Our role in this game is a person named Danny. She's a native Yaran living in the country when the government is putting a stop to a recent riot. She sees one of her closest friends die, and then they sprint through the streets trying to get to a nearby refugee ship until it's stopped by Anton. The ship is shot up, but somehow she's the only survivor. She washes up on a nearby beach next to her other dying friend and meets Clara, the leader of Libertad, a group about to start a revolution against Castillo. I was skeptical about this game. Originally, I wasn't even going to buy the game. Ubisoft has a history of having a consistent formula in its games, and recently has started blending those games together to where they start to feel like the same genre of game, just slightly different mechanics and location. Far Cry 6 in comparison to its predecessors is really no different. Besides small changes in the occasional overhaul across the series, every game from Far Cry 3 to 6 can almost be seen as the same game. I understand that's not entirely true, but it's also not entirely false either. This formula is wonderful but terrible at the same time, because if someone likes the consistency of the formula and doesn't want to deviate from it, they're gonna love all the games they produce, but if someone wants something different, they'll have to look elsewhere. This not only relates to Far Cry's gameplay, but also its story. We get a brief moment to see our protagonist, the antagonist, and the protagonist meet. They have a rivalry, then they duke it out at the end. However, Far Cry 6 attempts to change this formula. Far Cry has seen 2 evolutions in its series across the games. The evolution of the antagonist, but also the de-evolution of our protagonist. We went from having 2 named protagonists with motivations and personalities, being Jason and Ajay, to the deputy of Far Cry 5, faceless, nameless, and a mute. The intention being that we can put ourselves into this character. We are the deputy, but it doesn't feel the same. I preferred controlling a named person and watching the story unfold rather than become a part of the story. I talked a lot about this in my video a few months ago on the Far Cry villain, so if you do want to see that, stick around to the end of this video, or you could just go to the link down below. But even though in Far Cry 6 we got a named protagonist, I was still skeptical. But Ubisoft surprised me by not only adding a protagonist with some of the best personality in the series, but also continued to really push this idea that they are a real person with real interactions and real ideas, not some random faceless person the player controls. The game finally introduced third-person cutscenes, so now we can see our character and all their expressions and actions in its full glory. And on top of that, Danny is extremely likable. I still prefer Jason and his classic white American, never really had a bad day in his life personality, as that conflicts with the environment he's put in, but Danny's a close second. Her expressions coupled with her bilingual speaking skills make her all the more likable. One thing that truly amazed me was that Danny can actually sing along to the radio depending on the song. It might be small to some, but I loved it. She's a native to Yara, so it only makes sense that she can speak the language and know the culture, and Ubisoft continued to reinforce that idea. But they weren't done with these changes. For the first time in a while, our introduction to the protagonist wasn't a wrong place, wrong time scenario. If Jason ever went partying on a foreign island, he wouldn't have been captured. If Ajay played along with Pagan, or maybe went at a different time, he wouldn't have been swept up in this mess. If the deputy never joined the others, he wouldn't have been a major character in the game either. Danny wasn't at the wrong place at the wrong time. She was born in the wrong place. Everything went to shit before we even started the game. She's lived in Yara her whole life, and she was just in the wrong place since birth. It's a very different way to introduce a character that we haven't seen done yet, and it's also the first time we have a character who's native and familiar with the land we're in. The only person that could also belong in that description is the deputy, seeing as he was stationed at Hope County, but it doesn't really help much since he doesn't talk. Danny and the other people she meets with all talk about their times in Yara, all the things they did when they were young, and they talk about all the locations in the game like they're familiar with them, because they are. Another change was Danny's motivation. When I play story games, I try to break them as much as I can, in the context of backstory. I've done this quite a bit when creating characters in D&D, so I created a character that wants to go adventuring. The biggest question is why? To relate this to Far Cry 6, why deviate from your original goal to do something else? For Danny, the moment she gets on the beach, she says that she wants to go to Miami and leave the island. So my first thought is, how are they going to convince us that Danny changed her ideals and now attempts to start a revolution? Honestly, it's not clear and specific for the sake of gameplay, but what I have come up with is that because Danny has a background in weapons as she was once a soldier, she decided to help Clara in the beginning, as they have a mutual agreement. If Danny does this job for her, Clara gets her a boat, and Danny helps her take back one of the islands. And once she's helped her and realized that she is skilled enough to take on a small island mostly by herself, it might be enough to convince her that she is capable of winning this revolution. Whether or not you believe that is up to you, but more importantly, the game never took away her original plan. After taking back the tutorial island, you can actually leave when Clara gives you the boat, and it goes into the secret ending. Danny's relaxing on the Miami beach, Clara is dead, and Anton is still in power. Even though it's the bad ending, it goes back to the beginning scene where she was originally wanting to get on the boat off the island. It's obviously not an official ending, because then we wouldn't have a game, but it's nice that they continue to keep that in the game anyway. The last and arguably most important part is Diego and Anton. For the first time in a while, the protagonist and the antagonist do not have a history with one another. This isn't some personal relationship they built from the beginning. It's a dictator and a revolutionary. You don't run into Anton like you do the others that often. Besides the end of the game, you only run into him 2 times, once during the intro and once during a mission with Juan. After conquering majority of the island, ready to start the final mission, I had only seen him in person with Danny twice, whereas in the other games this would be the 4th, 5th, or 6th time I've been seeing them. We become a persistent asshole hell-bent on defeating them, but to Anton, we're just another person in his revolution. But then there's also Diego. Because there are now 2 important characters on the opposing side, time needs to be split between them, so we ended up getting less time with the antagonist than usual Far Cry games, but it played off as Diego was arguably my favorite character in the game, and the most important character in this game. The fact that Diego exists in the game at all is a complete curveball. In the past games, once you kill the antagonist, the game is over. Technically this isn't true, as Voss isn't the last villain, you can choose to let Pagan go, and Joseph isn't really dead, but you get my point. We all knew from the very beginning we would have a final showdown with our antagonist, and the game would be over soon after. Diego changes that. Diego is a 13-year-old boy and the next heir to Yara. Yes, he doesn't agree with his dad's ideas, but Anton has kept a tight leash around him, and it's never really clear what the hell he wants, mostly because he hasn't been given the option to do so. One moment he's pointing a gun at us, the next he's trying to save us. He's confusing us because he's confused himself. He doesn't know what he wants, and that means we, the player, don't know what to do about him. There were so many theories I had about Diego while playing. I was thinking that maybe Diego would die because Libertad sees him as the enemy. Maybe we could choose to save Diego. Maybe Diego, after seeing his family killed, becomes like his father, or maybe he's stronger than that and knows how to run the country properly. Or maybe since it's clear that Clara has her eyes set on the throne, maybe we have to choose between Diego or Clara. It was rattling my brain from the very beginning, but it's clear that because of his existence, this ending could go in any direction, which is the main reason I wanted to finish this game's story. Now that we're done with that incredibly long talk, let's talk about the rest of the game. This game functions like Far Cry 5, where we have 3 key areas to conquer before going after the leader. These areas are Maduraga, Valle de Oro, and El Este. Each of these areas is under siege between Anton's forces and some other militia groups. Clara wants to recruit them to Libertad, because if the 4 groups can coexist together, then they can defeat Anton. Far Cry once again gives you the option to go wherever you want to first. I personally went to Maduraga first since it was the closest, and definitely not for any other reason, but this area is under the control of Jose Castillo, the nephew of Anton, and we can join a group called the Monteros. El Este is controlled by Admiral Benitez and a politician named Sean McKay. Here we can join up with a group called La Moral, who works with the Legends of 67, the leaders of the past revolution who overthrew Anton's father. And lastly, Valle de Oro is under the control of Maria Marquesa, and as we discover later, Dr. Edgar Reyes, and we join a group of ragtag people called Maximas Matanzas. So 3 areas and 3 different different groups. This means it's 3 different experiences. Later in Valle de Oro, we can also discover each role of the island. Maduraga is where the crops and tobacco plants are grown for Viviro, Valle de Oro is where Viviro is packaged and produced, and El Este is where the chemical PG-240 is made, which creates Viviro. Each area has a role in the production of this drug, so each area has a unique leader to kill, a unique group to recruit, and on the other side of the coin, a unique role for producing Viviro on the island. This was wonderful, as it didn't feel like the same bullshit from one area to the next. Each group has a different reason they exist and different boundaries to overcome, and the island has different roles in its production of Viviro, so not only are we seeing 3 unique areas, the missions were related to these areas. We're not just destroying tobacco farms all game, we're sabotaging production plants and destroying propaganda depending on where we are, and it was extremely well thought out. Dialing it back a bit though, these groups were quite unique and entertaining, although the only one I didn't really like was the Monteros. The other 2, especially Maximus Matanzas, was incredible. Each had a ton of likable people, and at least one person being the comic relief. Maximus Matanzas, however, was easily my favorite as they took down the area's leader differently than the others. Both Monteros and La Moral can be seen as militia groups, shooting and killing their way to victory, but for Talia, Paolo, and Bicho, they just wanted to create some music. Their area's leader was Maria Marquesa, who runs huge propaganda campaigns for Anton, so why not beat her at her own game, and not kill her, but embarrass her? It's not enough just to remove the current leader from an area. You need to make the people living there feel free and encourage them to do their part and join the revolution, and that's what this group's job was. Each group had a sort of large moment where the climax came in. For the Monteros, it was the assassination of Jose Castillo. For La Moral and the leaders of 67, it was the assault on Admiral Benitez's fort, but for Maximus Matanzas, it was performing a concert while we defended them from waves of enemies. It was unique and magnificent. Each one of them in this group is extremely likable and had their own motives and personalities, and it was even great to see those motives and personalities come to light in the game's missions. Paolo wanted to leave the island like Danny did back in the intro, and since Paolo left, Talia was quite emotional and unstable about it, which led her to do drastic things like murdering Maria. She was on an unstoppable rampage, Paolo is gone, and Bicho's drinking his sorrows away because this radio group they built together was gone before it barely started. This game taps into this by having you bring Paolo back, which leads into a ton of cutscenes and dramatic moments, like meeting the doctor and creator of Viviro, almost dying from the disease itself because of him, because it's not a Far Cry game if you aren't drugged for an entire mission, and saving Bicho from attempting to murder Bembe. That's of course not to say the other 2 groups are bad, but Maximus Matanzas was clearly different from the other 2, and the way they went about getting their area was a whole different experience compared to the other 2 groups, and it was wonderful. Earlier I said Anton didn't get a lot of screen time compared to the other antagonists of the series. Whether that was because they hired an A-list actor who is probably quite expensive to cast, or it was intentional from the beginning, it didn't matter. Giancarlo did a wonderful job in this role. Anton is menacing when he's on screen, and there are tons of incredible things he says throughout the game, some of which make a lot of sense. Every time a major event happens, like the ones previously discussed, we get a short cutscene of Anton and Diego. One time Diego's practicing his shooting, the other time he's sitting down talking with his dad. This is not only a really good way of seeing the other side of our actions, but also seeing the characters develop as we go on. Anton is a dictator. He is not only there for a reason, but he has kept a hold of Yara this long for a reason. He is smart, and he is well versed in military strategy and political strategy. For example, during the fight with the Monteros, the leader Carlos was killed during the battle. Jose wanted to surprise Anton with this news, but he's less than excited.
Bien. Your cousin seeks praise.
Diego. If I knew his plan, I would have told him that the Montero roots run deep in the farmlands. 200 years.
Yes, Uncle, I was trying to surprise you.
Diego.
How many of your uncle's soldiers come from the farmlands?
80%, Papa.
Correct.
And now, he has made a martyr of the most famous Montero. Let's see how many of his soldiers want to rebuild paradise now.
This is not only a showcase of his knowledge in military strategy, but his strategy to recruit and boost the morale of the Yaran people. But by far the best was during the interview with him. I don't want to explain too much, so just listen.
Let's talk Viviro, a cancer treatment that extends the lives of millions around the world, except in the United States. My own father is stage 4. Why do you make Americans wait?
It's very American to expect what does not belong to you.
You refuse diplomatic overtures, even promises to lift the blockade.
I am sorry about your father, but Americans will wait, just like everyone else.
Yesterday, your network, Yaravision, was hijacked by rebels. They called for the liberation of so-called outcasts from Viviro labor camps. Is Viviro produced with slave labor?
Truth or lies?
The truth, of course.
Yara did not write the playbook. Slavery was your first corporation, 1800 to 1860. Cotton was your #1 export. Grown by whom?
Just a second.
Slaves. 4 million Americans, worth $3.5 billion. It was people who looked like me. What is that called?
A history lesson?
A head start. Replaced by a billion-dollar prison industry that pays its inmates pennies.
America is not alone.
Correct. Children sew our clothes. Sweatshops build our phones. And Viviro saves millions of lives. Do you think that those lives care where it comes from?
That line, do you think that those lives care where it comes from, is incredibly powerful and completely true, just like most of what he said. Yara's prospering because of the work of slaves, like how the United States was built on the back of slaves, and slave labor is nothing new. Like Anton said, America wrote the playbook. We're just as guilty as he is. Even the line I brought up before is true. I don't really care or want to look into the potential ramifications of my purchases. If I need clothes, I'm gonna buy them. Just like when I need a new iPhone, I'm going to buy it. And most people don't give a shit about the production of the product, only the outcome of that production. These are my favorite types of villains. Ones that have goals or ideas that are quite agreeable, or ones who do bad things for the sake of doing something good, as it makes you redraw the line of whether or not they're an actual villain or not. In Anton's case, he's a mix of both. I understand his intentions though. By creating Viviro, he could help the future of Yara, but the present Yara is going to suffer because of it. Anton to me is a welcome member of the Far Cry antagonists, and fits right in. He reminds me a lot of Pagan, actually, in his decisions that I once again discussed in my previous Far Cry video. He brings up that he justified his actions because his daughter died, the same way Ajay justified all his merciless killings throughout the game because his mom's wish was to be buried in Kirat. Both these villains make you think about your decisions, and Anton's questioning doesn't even stop at one simple line, it's reinforced throughout the whole game. It's one thing to take back Yara, but the real fight is after. Once Anton is dead, Yara is free, but now it's a war-torn country barely hanging on. It needs a leader and a political structure, or it's no better if not worse than Anton's regime. This is why towards the end of El Este, that politician Sean McKay strikes a deal with Juan, who is going to give him money so that he could be free. When the revolution is done, everyone will be dirt poor, jobless, some people even homeless. It's gonna be a mess. So by accepting this offer, we could fund the government we want to build for the future, but McKay goes free. So it's a choice, and one that took me lots of time to decide on. All of these thoughts and decisions the player has to make lead to the ending, the one thing everyone is focused on. What is going to happen to us, to Anton, to Diego, to Libertad, to Yara? What is going to happen? And to quickly summarize my thoughts, I was quite satisfied with the ending. The ending starts around that point of no return section of games as usual. We have eliminated all the opposition and taken most of Yara back. While we did lose some people along the way, we are finally ready to take the country back. But some prior knowledge is very relevant here. Once we defeat the Doctor, we get a cutscene that shows Anton about to make a quick announcement to the people of Yara about the Doctor's death, but we see him attached to an IV. It's clear that he needs a blood transfusion of some kind, so it's assumed that his health is declining. Back to the mission, once it starts, we get a call from Juan. Claire's been captured as she took the meeting with Anton. A little earlier in the game, this was hinted at when Danny and Clara met back at the orphanage, but she surprisingly took Anton up on his offer, but it was a very stupid decision as she is now played into his hands and is captured at his private island. So while Juan finds a suitable spot for the assassination, we infiltrate the compound posing as the soldiers so we can rescue Clara. It's also here where lots of shit goes down.
Stop staring. Sit.
Danny, sit down.
My mother had a rule. No lies at my table. And so, no lies for you. I have acute leukemia. I was diagnosed 13 years ago, but there was a doctor. He promised what we are all so desperate for. Time. But it wasn't enough. Was it, Diego?
Papa, I don't want to hear this story.
I needed insurance. But the irony was, I hated kids. But Maria, she had a way with words. And here you are, Mio. 13 years strong. And what happened next, Diego?
The Viviro stopped working.
When?
6 months ago.
Mi más sentida condolencias.
No lies at my table! I will be gone. But he He will see the vision through. Won't you?
Truth or lies?
Always truth.
You're a fucking monster.
Ah, I think that was truth.
Danny, watch my little firefly dance.
You know, when I captured Clara, I thought I had won. But it took my son to show me what was right before my eyes. You are Libertad.
I'm just a guerrilla.
No lies at my table.
You're a legend. They tell stories about you.
Come on.
You are their hope. And now,
You will become my hope.
You're kidding, right?
And you still don't get it. I told you to leave. This is your fault.
You want her to live. You will accept the rank of general.
my army, you will be my hope, my legend.
My Danny Rojas!
Why are you so obsessed with dividing us? True Yarans, fake Yarans. It's one fucking Yara! Let us pick our own future. You're just some sick, dying old man. And you poor kid. Your brain must be so fucked up with his poison.
No eyes on Anton. I'm taking out the kid.
Juan.
Who are you talking to?
I'm taking the shot.
Juan, no!
This is truly a wild scene. The camera angles, the close-ups, everything about this was executed wonderfully. Anton's eyes also look different in this scene, and I can't tell if it's because he's going blind or not, but regardless, he definitely doesn't look good at all. His whole plan was because he was diagnosed with acute leukemia, he didn't have enough time to see his vision of Yara come true. So he had a kid with Maria, even though he didn't like kids, so that Diego could run the country when he dies. He didn't create a life out of want, but out of necessity. Diego's whole backstory is completely messed up, and we could see the impact it has on him. He's a 13-year-old boy with no childhood and no way out of the situation he was put in from birth. Anton wasn't just hurting the people of his country, but his own son that he didn't even want to begin with. It's probably the best cutscene in the game, and one that has to be played out in full to really showcase the true power behind it. Back to the game, it's clear things have gone to shit, and we need to leave immediately. Danny catches up with Juan and argues about Diego, and this is where that division comes in. Let me know in the comments who you relate to. I agree with Danny. Diego was just a kid who got caught up in the wrong stuff, but I'm wondering if some of you may agree with Juan, who he's just a kid, but Diego's a Castillo, and he needs to be killed. Danny is now the leader of Libertad and leads all the groups she has recruited throughout the story to initiate the final assault on Castillo. The Battle of Esperanza was a wonderful mission, and the soundtrack playing behind the fighting is really motivating and matches the theme of this mission and everything it stands for. Tons of guards are here, and after we clear them going floor to floor up Castillo's tower, we finally reach the top.
He's about the same age I was when the guerrillas murdered my father. I never thought that you would have to face what they put me through. I'm sorry, Diego. You are my lion. Everything that I did to make you stronger.
You are not going to kill him. He's gonna die anyway.
Last lesson, Mio. There is one thing in life that will always be true. Do you know what that is?
Death.
See. You will protect him from your friends, from the monsters.
He'll be safe. I promise.
Lies.
Diego! No!
Honestly, that's not at all what I thought was going to happen. Truly, that was quite the shock. I figured someone was going to die, but the way it happened was definitely not the way I expected. Everything about this part of the game was great. I just wish Diego was given the option to actually do something. I wanted Diego to speak his feelings, show us what he actually wants instead of just muttering a few words every now and then. But maybe that was actually the point. Maybe it was to show that he will never understand what he wants because of Anton. He has essentially ruined Diego from birth and he's never going to recover. Let me know what you think about that in the comments below. I wish we got more stuff regarding Diego, but even with what we have, I'm completely satisfied. I figured Far Cry wasn't going to shy away from having an indiscernible ending in the context of good or bad, since these endings usually go both ways, but I never expected what we saw during the ending. We aren't done though, since there is a small after credit scene that is only audio where Juan and some smuggler are doing a drug trade. It seems that Juan is selling Viviro across the border to make a large amount of money for himself. I'm unsure how to interpret this, but the only thing I can come up with is that Juan doesn't really care about Yara and he only did the revolution to make a quick buck, which is quite selfish. But maybe I'm looking at it wrong. Regardless though, this does bring us to the end of Far Cry 6 and equally to the end of this video. Far Cry 6 in regards to its story was really well done, and surprisingly was able to twist my ideas about this series quite fast. As stated in the intro of the video, I was skeptical about even buying this game, but the writers really took some big strides in keeping things consistent, but also attempting to branch out into other ideas of storytelling, like its third-person cutscenes, charismatic protagonist, and the addition of its third-party character in the form of Diego. Far Cry 6 is a great game, and in terms of its story, I recommend it. Anton has a lot of competition, as this game is filled with brilliantly made villains, but I think he fits in perfectly. But now we've actually come to the end of the video. Thank you all for watching today. As I've said numerous times before, I did do a character analysis on Voss, Pagan, and Joseph, so if you do want to hear me talk about them for about 30 minutes, that'll be linked down below, but also with the end card coming up in a couple moments. If you want to see more videos like this, feel free to check out any of my other previous videos, like my analysis of Fallout New Vegas or Deathloop. And of course, if you're new, then subscribe for more content like this in the future, and if you're a returning viewer, I thank you for coming back. Take care, everyone, and goodbye.